I was late getting to my microphone. You wouldn't know that, but typically I like to be behind this microphone more than an hour before the program. And I do prep for this program throughout the day and night because this program is very important to me and I hope to you, and I don't want you to waste your time. And the reason I was late getting to the microphone wasn't because I was short on preparation. No, I over-prepare. It's because I did something I've never done in 21 years, Mr. Producer. I wrote an opening statement that I want to read to you, that I just posted online. And I think I speak for tens of millions of Americans who love our country. I honestly never imagined that I would be witness to the slaughter and atrocity of Jews, with the history of the Holocaust not far away, and have to spend nearly 24 hours a day defending their right to self-defense, which obviously requires the destruction of the modern-day Nazis. And not only against these Nazis, but against growing voices in the Democrat Party, the American media, and college campuses. I honestly never thought I'd see the day when recent Arab immigrants to our country, some illegal who have overstayed their student visas, the usual neo-Nazis in our country, Black Lives Matter and other black nationalists and separatist groups, and yes, college students, including those attending our top Ivy League schools, carrying signs in our streets saying "Exterminate the Jews," Hitler was right, and carrying flags with swastikas in our cities throughout our country, and issuing letters and petitions in defense of a group like Hamas when it wasn't even done slaughtering Jews, as if we were witnessing the early days of the Third Reich. I honestly never imagined that the New York Times and the Washington Post and the other media corporations, despite how horrendous they are, and some of them around during the Holocaust, would repeat their history of abandoning the victims, the Jews, when they were facing extinction. So much for our free press standing up against tyranny. Meanwhile, the Biden administration, from Biden to Blinken, make these passionate statements about Hamas atrocities, virulent anti-Semitism, the history of the Jewish people, unconditional support for Israel, yet repeatedly lecture and even admonish Israel, including while standing next to the Israeli Prime Minister, that its response to this monstrous, unprovoked attack be met with proportionality. You mean an eye for an eye? A beheading for a beheading? What does this mean? And that the Israelis comply with the rules of war. Rules of war against Nazi terrorists who time and again slaughter Jews and say they won't stop until the Jews are exterminated? What rules of war? And even before the first Israeli tank moves into Gaza, the Israelis are to feed and medicate the Palestinians who live in Gaza while their own young men and women prepare for and undoubtedly will face a hellish war and massive casualties? I honestly never imagined that any American president would rearm an Iranian Nazi regime that threatens America, our country, with nuclear annihilation, and spends billions and billions on terrorism against our country in the pursuit of nuclear weapons, and against the Israelis, among others, by intentionally allowing it to violate oil sanctions intended to economically strangle that regime to the tune of $70 billion. And 2 weeks before the attack on Israel makes a deal in which the Iranians are to receive $6 billion more. This would be the same regime that took American hostages, killed and maimed American soldiers in Iraq, attempted to assassinate Mike Pompeo and John Bolton. The immorality alone of making such a payment to such a regime is shocking. And now Hamas tells a Russian media outlet that it took hostages because it saw what Biden was willing to pay for them. And as of this writing, not a single policy has been changed toward Iran. Not one. The oil still flows, the money still goes in. This is worse than appeasement. This is worse than Neville Chamberlain. This is literally giving aid and comfort to the enemy. It is suicidal to our own nation and for Israel. And the same Biden regime leaves our own borders wide open, overwhelmed with illegal aliens, including from the Middle East, with no vetting whatsoever. Millions of so-called gotaways, with 100,000 American deaths a year from fentanyl. Horrendous inhumanity unleashed on our own southern border. And billions of dollars lining the pockets of murderous drug cartels right on our border. Yet no change in policy. None. None. Despite what we just saw. Joe Biden is exposing our country to a terrorist calamity by the same terrorist regimes and terrorist groups who committed atrocities against the Israelis and who committed atrocities against us on 9/11, and frequently for the last 20 years. We are a nation in decline. We've become a nation divided, even when it comes to our own survival. The domestic police state has become bolder, even attempting to imprison a former president, censor news and information, arrest and threaten pro-American peaceful protesters, and brainwash our children against their own parents, against their own country, against our own history, against our own culture, and against their own mental and physical well-being. The writing is on the wall. My recommendation to the Israelis, for what it's worth, fight hard, defeat the enemy, or you will not survive. Keep your spirit and will to live, and reject our incompetent and defeatist ruling class here in America that seeks to devour our own American patriotism and spirit. Do not allow the Biden regime, with all its blood on its hands, and especially the anti-Semitic State Department, the American and European media propagandists, America's pro-Hamas Marxist professors and students, with student organizations funded by Qatar and other Arab regimes and terrorist-supporting entities, and the Jew-hating wing of the Democrat Party. Don't let them dissuade you. Do whatever you need to do for your own survival. There was a time when we, in America, understood this and would do whatever we had to do to protect our own country, including in World War II when Japan and Germany were obliterated, nearly wiped off the face of the earth. We were united. We loved our country. We intended to utterly destroy our enemies, and that is exactly what we did. Was that proportionate? Nobody asked and nobody cared. Did that violate the rules of war? What rules of war? Was Harry Truman a war criminal? Was Harry Truman a war criminal? When we fought so-called proportionate wars, we lost in Vietnam, and we lost over 58,000 men. The communists control Vietnam. We lost Afghanistan. Now the Taliban controls Afghanistan after 21 years, and the deaths and the horrendous industries and the casualties are obvious all around us every day. In Iraq, we lost many men in Iraq due to the Iranian regime that just received $6 billion. And many were horrendously wounded. That's now controlled by Iran. Did you know that? We in America have lost too many of our warriors and spilled too much blood fighting proportionate wars. The Israelis have no choice but to fight or die.